Now, we're happy, aren't we? We've got Postfix up and running. There's nothing more that we need to do. Well, of course, there's always more to do. The default configuration is going to work okay for you, but it's not necessarily going to be the best. So we're going to take a look at email aliases and cutting down the IP services that we are listening on. So when we go through and take a look at our listening ports, we're going to be listening on both IP version 4 and IP version 6. Well, maybe we only need IP version 4. When we look at our alias file, there is an alias file, but there isn't an alias for the root user. By default, we get an alias for the postmaster, and it then addresses messages through to root. We can remove this file. Removing it, because we've only got that one built-in alias, is going to allow the reconfigure of Postfix to create a new one with the alias that we specify. As we run through dpkg reconfigure, any of our installation packages that have scripts built in will rerun those scripts, but we'll actually see more verbose questioning. And we're going to be asked if we want to create an alias for our root user. And of course, we can say yes. And maybe we'll alias root through to our built-in account Vagrant, our user that we are using. It's also going to ask us about any of the ports that we want to listen on. We're going to be able to say that we don't want to be listening on IP version 6, so we can disable IP version 6. We can restart Postfix at the end just to make sure all the configuration changes have been properly applied. And then when we list our ports, we're able to see we're no longer listening on IP version 6. And when we send mail messages now through to root, we're going to be able to read them through our own mailbox, as any messages for root are being sent through to the mail user. And of course, we can add in other aliases ourselves just by going through to the etc and aliases file. And this is what we're going to look at in our demonstration. We're going to go through and reconfigure Postfix. We're going to be adding a root alias. We'll be adding our own alias later for webmaster and seeing how we have to run the new aliases command to reread that file. And we'll be listening only on IP version 4. Come on, let's find that command line. Now, let's just remind us when we go through and list our TCP ports, we are listening on port 25 to IP version 6. That's the double colon. And on 0.0.0.0 colon 25, well, that's then our IP version 4 versions. And we don't necessarily want everything configured the way that it is. The system also created for me a file /etc/aliases. When we look at that, we have one alias for the postmaster, and that is then being redirected through to our root account. But we're going to look at how we can configure an alias during our configuration. For the configuration to write to the aliases file, it won't write to the aliases file if it exists. So as long as you don't have much in your configuration, it's very easy for me then to go through and run a sudo, an rm, escape and dot brings up our last argument, and let's clear our screen. We're going to run through then sudo and dpkg -reconfigure. And of course, that's going to do exactly what it says on the tin, and we want to reconfigure Postfix. So we can leave this at our internet site. We're happy with our domain name. Now we can see then for root and postmaster mail recipients, we can then go through and say, well, look, it's going to be the Vagrant user. Or if you're using a different user account, use your user account name. And then we can go through and hit OK. We've got then other configurations here. So it's looking at the systems we can receive messages for. So Ubuntu 2.local, local, Ubuntu 2, localhost. We're going to leave this as is. We don't need to worry about our synchronous updates. For local networks, what we're going to go through and do here is just put a space and then 192.168.1. 56.0/24. So this is a space-separated list. And this is then going to say, well, okay, who can we relay messages for? So if people from the network wants to send to other internet hosts, so fred@mickeymouse.com, then we would be relaying that for them. So we can allow relaying from our local network. And then go, okay. We don't need to implement a mailbox size. We don't need to worry about local address characters. So I can go, okay, on this. And we can then specify that we only want to work with IP version 4. Hit OK. And now it runs through the reconfigure. Just to make sure, I'm going to restart my service. So Control and L and sudo systemctl and restart Postfix. And now when I look at ss-ntl, we can go through and see that we are listening on port 25, but only on 0.0.0.0. When I cat out /etc/aliases, we can see then that we've got the postmaster and root, but root is being redirected through to Vagrant. We were limited by the amount of aliases that we could put in during that installation script. We could only add an alias for postmaster and a root. But if we go through and add our own aliases by adding or editing that file, then there's nothing stopping us, let's say, adding in a common alias that we might want for a web server, so webmaster, and we might think to redirect it to Vagrant, but that would really be the wrong idea. Because if our Vagrant user ever left, somebody would take over, and we would need to change all of our aliases to point to the right new user. If we consider webmaster being redirected through to root, and then root only needs to be redirected to the one user, it makes long-term management much, much more simple, as we only need to edit the one alias for root. But with that then set, we are ready through to save our changes. Now, to read this into Postfix, we use the command new aliases run as root. So we can go through and execute this. This is going to read it into Postfix in a format that it can understand, and it will now be functioning. We can test all of this functionality by mailing. So we'll send a message through to root. We can set our subject, let's say just as test. And we don't need to CC anyone, and we can write some rubbishy text. Now, we've already seen how we can create messages like this, so Control and D at the end. But if we test our webmaster in a slightly different way, if we've got a relatively short message, we can echo it through using the pipe symbol, sending it into mail, and then we can go through and send to our webmaster with a subject of, we'll have, let's say, just message. So that's all been sent, and we can read it through the mail command. We can see our test message, which was the message that we sent to root, and we can see the message number 3, which is the subject message that we sent through to our webmaster. So we can see as a one user, we're able to pick up messages for those other system accounts. If we look at that message, so type in number 3, we're able to see our wonderfully crafted hello message. And we've looked at different ways that we can send messages, so using the pipe symbol or reading it in from a file or just typing it and Control D. We've seen how we can use aliases, and we've implemented our aliases by running the new aliases command afterwards. And we can see the rest of the configuration can be run through our dpkg reconfigure. And don't forget to restart or reload your service at the end. But go on, let's return to our slide so we might look a little bit more.